And I had somebody tell me not too long after I moved here, you can't make a living playing music in this town. And I just thought, man, there's some really nice houses over in Williamson County that are built out of music. Don't tell me that, because people are doing it, and they're doing it in 100 different ways, and there is no formula. There is no formula for the success. You can do it a variety of ways, but it happens here. This is where it's at. This is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak.
Hello, everybody. That was James Key, who is a singer and musician and the co-host of Bluegrass Wednesdays at the American Legion, Post 82. We talked with him and his Bluegrass Wednesdays co-conspirator, Evan Winsor, who you'll hear more from later on. They talk bluegrass, the increasingly famous American Legion Post 82 over in East Nashville, and their inclusion of a Pride event this month that will, unfortunately, have happened after this episode airs. But hey, Bluegrass, American Legions, and Pride. It's most definitely an interesting conversation, and it feels very, very Nashville, if you don't mind my saying. I'm also thrilled to let you know that you'll hear from Eleanor Buckland, or Ellie Buckland, known to her friends, of the amazing band Lula Wiles. I'm sure you've heard of Lula Wiles by now. They have taken America by storm. She'll talk with you about her decision to move from Boston to Nashville and about all the different things that means for her career, and her sanity as a professional musician. This is Nashville Demystified. I am Alex Steed. Every week I talk with a relatively new Nashvillian about something I'd like to understand further, and then I talk with someone who's been here for longer and is presumably an expert in the area. This week, everybody's new, more or less, although James and Evan come talking about Bluegrass and the Legion, both of which have been around for about 75 years. Ellie moved here under a month ago and is so sporadically in town, I had to interview her by phone, and I need to preemptively apologize for the quality of the recording of our conversation, but it is worth listening to, I promise. Nashville Demystified is brought to you by Knack Factory, and we own this town. Knack Factory is a commercial video and content production firm in Nashville. We own this town as a collective of podcasters based in Nashville. One show you might enjoy is one called We Own This Town. It's hosted by Michael Eads, who runs the network and the podcast and serves as a primer for all of the amazing music that is not country coming out of Nashville. Michael also helped, I should say, produce this episode of today's show. I have known Ellie Buckland, I believe, since right around when her band Lula Wiles started. I used to run into her at festivals in Maine. We became friendly since. She's a songwriter, a singer, and a fiddler. The Lula's album, What Will We Do, is out on Smithsonian Folkways Recordings. It came out at the start of this year. It is phenomenal. And the band's been touring nonstop since last fall. I wanted to talk with her specifically because she is starting to live a life that looks a lot like the lives of many Nashvillians I know. Particularly musicians, where home is almost more of an imagined construct than a reality because so much time is spent away. Because she was teaching at a camp in Maine, having just left teaching a camp in New Hampshire, having just taken a break from a tour before going back on tour, we had to improvise a bit, and the audio is absolutely listenable but not wholly ideal. Please bear with us. What Ellie shares here makes it all worthwhile. Here's Ellie.
Yeah, with it, like, being on the road is a really weird thing, you know, and, like, I still feel like I'm brand new to it because we've only been touring, Lula has only been touring full-time for 1 year, like, and before that it was really sporadic, but, yeah, like, for the next, 5 months, we spend, like, 2 to 3 weeks each month on tour, and that's kind of crazy. I don't think it's sustainable, but we're figuring it out. We're figuring it out. But it means that, like, yeah, how long is it going to take? And this idea of, like, forcing it, right? How long is it going to take for me to feel like Nashville is home?
Increasingly, like, listening to you talk and listening to a lot of people that both you and I know talk, it strikes me more than it's ever struck me before that I think musicians probably think about what home means more than anybody else.
Oh, that's so interesting. I definitely think about it a lot right now, especially since I was like trying to decide if I wanted to move and where I wanted to move. But I think that's true because I think sort of the average person maybe has a job. Yeah, like at least a person who has a job where they don't travel a lot, right? Home, I think, becomes maybe slips into the background, right? And maybe people think about, oh, how do I want my life to be? But their home is just always their home, right? And there isn't as much of this thing of like going away and then like, oh my God, I can't wait to get home. This is something that has like really deeply been on my mind because that was a big part of like why I decided to move to Nashville. So I had visited so many times and when we were on the road, right? And it would always then end up like we had an extra day off in Nashville. We would sometimes plan for that because we have so many friends here. It's like so fun. And so I liked it a lot. When we would go to town, like go to Nashville, everyone would be like, oh, let's go to the lake. Like, oh, let's have a barbecue tonight right. And just like chill out. And there was something really lovely about that. Like when I imagined a life home from the road, it's like a much slower thing, I think, than Boston. And it's more, I know it's a city, but it is more in kind of like nature. Like you have access to nature in a way that I feel like it's hard in Boston. And I grew up in rural Maine, and so I like really, in a lot of ways, feel like I have a lot of like country gal at that heart, and like, but I think Nashville has this cool thing of like you have all these things about the city, that you have access to in being in a city, right? But then you also like there are like you can get to nature pretty quickly. But yeah, like in terms of like what does it? I asked myself this a lot. I really explored like, what do I want my life to be when I get home? What do I want my home life to be? And I started feeling like Boston just like was not cutting it and was not what I wanted.
Yeah.
Nashville had an energy that I was like, I want to be here. Like this is great.
Because it is this very high concentration of people who have this tenuous and aspirational idea of what home is because they spend so much time away from it, that when everyone comes together, and this is exclusively observational because I'm not a musician, but it's something that I'm getting more of a sense of, that when everybody comes together, the willingness to sort of get together and make the most of make the most sort of like fertile use of that home time is much higher than it is in places where, there's only like a handful of musicians, or the musicians that sort of like hang out together are a clique that see each other all the time, and there's not sort of like cross-genre pollination. Like it seems like even just the idea of any time I've been in a room here where there's more than one musician, the genre diversity across the room is really interesting. People's just being psyched to like sit down and not be, as you said, not be under the scrutinized eye of performance is high, and people's interest in doing stuff that they're not doing on the road, which is often, on the road, it's every day is sort of probably by way of your output like 95% the same as the day before. Just like there's so many factors that are making you want to, make the most of like the geography and scene and sort of like social element that's here.
I think that's totally true. I have so many thoughts about this observation of yours, but first and foremost, I think you're totally on it. And I hadn't thought about that, right? That like, but I do think that the high percentage of so many musicians at any given party in Nashville and in Boston, I pretty much only hung out with musicians, which was sort of like something that also exhausted me, right? Yes. And then I was like, LOL, why don't I move to Nashville? Right? I'm like, that's not going to get better, right? But I lost my train of thought. But know that that, right, there's like so many musicians in one place, and so a lot of us are touring, and so a lot of us have the same feeling of like, oh, when I get home, I just want to be like wicked domestic and like maybe play tunes around a campfire, but like chill the fuck out and like not be like, you know, like speeding around all the time, because the life that like, the life on the road, you know, is really fast paced and it's like exhausting and you're always in a new place. But yeah, you're right, it's the same. And so I think there is this thing of like, oh, when I get home, maybe I'll like see my friends, like bring them over for dinner, like, you know, let's go bowling. You know, these are things that like, you know, I think that just, I mean, what I'm describing is just kind of like anyone's home life, but maybe it is true that we, as musicians who are touring all the time, maybe we appreciate it more, right? And so maybe we're more like gung-ho to do that. And I think even when you're like, oh, I'm so passionate about what I do, and for me, I'm like, I feel so privileged to be able to like do what I love, right? The fact that I was like able to grow up in a place where like, you know, my dad is a musician. A lot of people on my dad's side are musicians, right? Like, and so I was like, that was cultivated, you know, like when I was like, I want to play music all through high school and do arts and stuff and do dance, like my parents were like, yeah, we'll pay for that, you know. And then when I was like, I want to go to Berkeley, they were like, great, you know, super cool. I didn't have to like fight back against my familiar situation, and I didn't have to fight out of like poverty to do something in the arts, right? So I want to like recognize that privilege, but like the fact that I get to do this like thing that I love so much for a job, I'm really lucky and I'm really privileged to have that, right? But also, it can be like shitty, you know, it can be exhausting, and you can be like, right, all I do is music, and I don't like that, right? And that is, which I think ties into what you're saying of like this, we can all be in a room and like not schmooze and not talk about all the music, you know, and talk about like other things, you know, and other interests and passions. And that was something that is something I think I'm thinking about a lot right now. I need to be doing other things. Like I need to be doing more with my brain. Like I felt like so super saturated by music, and I was just like, I only spend time with musicians, and all we talk about is music and songs and blah, and like, or like booking agents, or like how do we do blah blah blah, and like just all this like business stuff, right? And I was like, I want to be exercising like my other interests. I feel as though my move to Nashville is this signifying event of like, okay, I'm moving into a new space, a new time of life, and the fact that I'm moved means that I get to cultivate that, right? Like I get to set up my life in a way that I want it, in maybe a way that like doing it in Boston was like kind of hard to rewire, right? But this time around, it's like, okay, well, when I go out and meet people, like how can I go out and meet people who are musicians, right? And maybe I do this sort of like hilarious thing of like, oh, I'll do like a running group meetup, right? Or like maybe I go like take a pottery class, right? And like meet people that way, like trivia, you know, there are all these like sort of, I think people think of them as kind of like hokey and cliche, and I'm like, fuck yeah, I'll do that. Like I just want to meet some cool gals who like don't play music, but like make podcasts, or like are writers, you know.
Ellie, they're only hokey and cliche until you're 30 and there's no other way to make friends.
Okay, cool. I bet you think I got 4 years, right? But I'll just like get on it now.
Thanks again, Ellie. Eleanor Buckland. You can find her on the internet. You can find the Lula's record everywhere where records are. Pick it up. Check her out. She's a wonderful human being. Next, I talk with James Key, who is a singer and multi-instrumentalist, and Evan Winsor. Evan is a bassist, and together, Evan and James run Bluegrass Wednesday at the American Legion, Post 82, right on Gallatin in East Nashville. At Bluegrass Wednesday, you can see a handful of bands perform on a stage, while in the back by the bar, a number of local bluegrass musicians of all calibers, flavors, and affiliations come together for an epic night-long jam. I've been a couple of times. It's a lot of fun. And as I've mentioned here, the Legion is the most affordable full-service bar in probably all of Nashville. No $17 cocktails here. In addition to all this, we talk bluegrass, the history of the so-called Music City, and this may surprise some. We talk about a collaboration Bluegrass Wednesday will be having with an organization called Bluegrass Pride. It's a fascinating conversation. I hope you will enjoy it. But first, please subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen. Consider giving a review if you can and sharing with a friend. We're on Instagram and Twitter, Nashville Demystified. I think on Twitter it's Demystified. And we're on the Adam Sandler's bottomless Netflix film contract that is Facebook. If you have any feedback and you want to send it to me directly or ideas for future shows or whatever, podcast at knack-factory.com. That's podcast at knack-factory.com. That's where you can find me. Thank you. Let's listen to what these guys have to say.
Well, I am James Key, and this is Evan Winsor, and we're the hosts of Bluegrass Wednesday Nights.
Yep. Yeah. What is Bluegrass Wednesday Nights?
So this is an event we started at the end of November of last year, and it's at the American Legion Post 82.
East Nashville.
That's right. And the American Legion Post 82, it might seem like an unlikely music venue, but there's a ton of great music there almost every night of the week. And Evan had this idea. They'd been doing a jam that I guess was derived from another jam at another place.
The 5-spot.
Yeah, and I hear all these stories from Nashville natives, how it had came from, some other place before that, and how it used to be really good and all these things, and it had changed to this and that. And so they'd been having this jam on Wednesdays, and I think it was kind of hit or miss. And so Evan had this idea to do music in the back room, because the Legion's a really, really large facility. The jam is up front. And so we started in late November. I think we had 3 bands the first night, and sometimes we have 2, but we're basically from here on out, I think, going to try to be scheduling 3 bands for each week, and it starts around 8 and runs till maybe around 11 or midnight, depending on what all we have. And it's local, regional acts. Sometimes people traveling through, but it's a really talented music scene that we're part of, and so you just never know who's going to be there. And I think that's kind of what's exciting about it, all the different guests that we can get up, that we don't even know who's going to be there each week.
Yeah. Why were you inspired to put together a night like this?
Well, I had just moved to town last year from California, and I kind of came here expecting there to be like a central weekly hang where everybody just kind of, showed up and picked tunes and hang out. And I was kind of, in up all the local jams, and I went over to the Legion a few times, and, maybe 2-3 people would show up. And I happened to go one night, and there was maybe, again, 2 or 3 people there. And the Legion commander came up to us and said, "Hey, guys, we're literally losing money on Wednesday night. We're thinking about just turning the lights off, shutting the doors, unless there's someone out there that can do a bluegrass night kind of modeled after Honky Tonk Tuesday." So I kind of looked around the empty room and said, "Well, all right."
I'd never heard this side of the story.
We'll give it a go.
It sounds like a movie from the 70s. It's like, guys, we gotta shut down the Legion on Wednesday nights unless you can get a bluegrass night.
Right.
You did it.
And I mean, I really wanted a central weekly hang for everybody to show up, and I wanted to get the whole local scene connected, including newcomers like myself, to meet everybody. Yeah. I think that's kind of what we've been accomplishing.
Yeah, that's what everybody likes about it the most. Even on the attendance, with us having this event in its infancy, the attendance is up and down, and it's certainly been better the last few months. But even on nights where we don't have a huge crowd, the ones that are there really wanted to, they want to be there, and that seems to be the general vibe no matter what night of the week you go. I think everybody likes the Legion. There's some cool history in that building that I wasn't really aware of. It was built sometime in the 50s, and it was really a who's who of all of our musical heroes over the last well, since it was built.
Flattened Scruggs and Monroe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they rattled off a list of all these legendary bluegrassers and several other different country artists that had played there, and it's kind of been a honky-tonk for folks like us since back then. So it's got some character within the building for sure. And I think as a Legion, I never really envisioned myself playing at a Legion each week. And typically when you hear that term, I think the one here in East Nashville, Post 82, is unlike some of the other Legions.
Yeah, I agree.
And they've really embraced the music, and they have a fairly unique opportunity because of that to really connect with the public in a way that most Legions do not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's.
really
I mean,
impressed
it's.
With that.
I feel like in Nashville in particular, the authenticity of a place comes with like nicotine stained wood paneling. Like I feel like it's a really important.
It is, it is, and we should add that it is a smoke free venue today.
Yes.
It's still got the smoke eater fans and the smoke eater devices and all that are.
I've heard younger people there be like point to those smoke eater fans and not know what they are, and I'm like, oh.
I remember.
Comes from a different time.
I remember that, and at one point in my life, it didn't bother me. And if you stay away from cigarette smoke for a long time, it's hard to go back into it.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
So I'm glad to announce that we don't have that issue at the Legion, and there's a great bar, full bar. They got liquor and beer, great bar staff, and they'll stay open late as we want to. You know, sometimes midnight or a little after. It just kind of depends who all's there, but the Legion's been very supportive of what we've been doing, and we certainly appreciate them.
What's the significance of having like when you came out and you were like, this thing is missing,
right?
Like, what's the significance of having a place where people can meet up like that? Like,
I think it's kind of actually rooted in the culture of bluegrass. I mean, I kind of got into bluegrass. You know, I heard. You know, Tony Rice and Ricky Skaggs, but really what drew me into was going to bluegrass festivals and just staying up until 5 o'clock in the morning picking with your friends. And there's a great sense of community that ties bluegrass together that I've not found in any other genre of music. I think it might be unique to bluegrass, the really community aspect of it.
Yeah, there's still some of these larger bluegrass festivals. I would feel comfortable leaving like a nice guitar just out in the open for the whole weekend, and
nobody will touch it.
Nothing would happen to it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you're right about the community piece. Like, it's it seems pretty fundamental. I can't think of many other places where there's the stage and then there are musicians where people sort of informally doing their own thing is as big a part of the show.
Yes, absolutely, for sure.
Yeah.
So I think it's just kind of ingrained in the music. And wherever you go, you know, you always want to have those two things. You want to have the music plus the community aspect. And when I moved here, it was a little difficult for me at first to kind of network and meet folks. So I figured, well, what the hell?
Yeah, and same story for me too. Me being a singer, and it's a little more difficult if you want to sing lead to get a gig that's not your own gig. There's not as many people that are going to hire you. I'd done a lot of sideman work, and I still do. But when I moved here, I really wanted to sing, and I wanted to have an outlet for that. And the Legion was perfect in it, so it really worked out.
Yeah. What has happened since you started up? I mean, obviously people are coming, but are there any sort of like standout nights for you, or you know, what's the vibe? Just explain it a bit for people who haven't been there.
Well, certainly what has been surprising to me, I guess they just don't think about this kind of stuff, but the event is bigger on the internet than it is in real life. So
we're happy to contribute to that.
Well, I appreciate that, but each week it seems like I see video or clips or something, you know, some highlight of the event that gets shared, and it'll have thousands and thousands of internet views, when you know, there might have been like 35 people in the room.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So there's several standout nights, but really just any of them could be a standout night, because we never know who's going to be out in the crowd. And at the end of the show, we're the Post 82 Bluegrass House Band, and so we always encourage anybody that wants any of our friends to get up there and sing a tune, and you never know who that's going to be. Yeah. It could be any of our musical heroes that might stumble in, and so I'm anxious to see what will happen over the next year as we continue to gain a little bit of, you know, momentum, and more people understand about this event and what we're doing. I'd love to get some more big names in there.
Yeah. So you came in from Chattanooga, you said?
Yeah.
And are you originally from California?
No, I'm not from originally California, but I've been living in Los Angeles for about, 8 or 9 years.
Yeah.
Ish.
Well, can you explain a bit about like what Nashville's like from your perspective and why you both ended up here?
I mean, I had wanted to move to Nashville for a long time, but I had a lot of work out in California. And it's hard to leave work. I was basically working, playing bluegrass as much as I wanted to. I just wasn't feeling quite inspired out in California anymore. And, all the greatest players live out in Nashville. And I wanted to come out here and challenge myself so I could, rise to the occasion, just be the best version of myself as possible.
Yeah.
So I guess that's why I wanted to move here in the first place.
Yeah, right.
Really just for inspiration.
Nice. And for you?
Well, same. I've always played music and I've done as much of it as I could, but I spent most of my career working in the landscaping business. And once I got closer to 30, I started looking at guys that had been in the landscaping business for 20 or 30 years.
Hunched over, And
I started going, man, I don't know that I want to look like that. And
yeah.
It wasn't that I hated it, but I realized I needed to find something else to do. So I had a family here in town, and it just kind of made sense. So mom's side of the family grew up here. And there was some. I just felt like there would be no shortage of opportunity for me, and I've been right. So.
Yeah. What's your pitch to people who are not living in Nashville that maybe they should, I mean, it's not like Nashville needs more people, but like
exactly.
My pitch.
It's not good to be here.
I don't mind seeing the influx. I mean, my pitch, and this is nothing against Texas or California or anywhere where you're from, where there's awesome music scenes. Everybody moved from wherever they came from to here to get famous. You can go down the list of all of our favorite Texas singers, and they all came here to get their career started.
Right. That's what I've heard about, and I'm not a musician, so but I spend a lot of time with musicians. But what I've heard is that that especially with like between like Austin and Nashville, and not that these have to be sort of competitive arenas, but with Austin, it's a great place to play. It's got a great scene. It's got a lot of people who come to it, but it's not necessarily a place to be in the middle of sort of like not competition, but to like push yourself further.
Right.
And that it seems like here there's very much a culture of camaraderie and community, but also to push.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Austin probably was at some point a little bit more so what you're talking about, but they're now the 9th or 10th largest city in the U.S. I didn't realize just how much they have grown over the last few years till I went back about 3 or 4 months ago. And it's still got some character. It's still a neat town, but even looking at it from a business standpoint, there's not any, and not that it matters for what we do, but there's no major record labels really that are headquartered down there. There's not a huge percentage of the population that's making their living off of playing music.
Right.
And having institutions like the Opry, the longest running radio show and so forth, that was so highly revered right here in Nashville is something that's not going to change anytime soon. Even if this city does get as big as Austin, or I think we're like number 25 or something. We've got a long way to go, which is good as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. I'm okay with it being a smaller city. We don't have all those big city woes just yet, but I think it'll always remain. Growing up for me, it was always country music city USA, but it's just music city USA today.
Yeah. Right.
There's all different types of music here.
Yeah. And I mean, for what does in your respective like genre and craft, like what does community mean to all of that? Like why is it significant that you are able to see people week to week doing interesting stuff? And we were talking earlier about just you having like going to like a magical show where it was like you and 15 people. Like what does that mean to you guys as musicians?
Well, and I guess it's part of my story of coming here that I had forgot to mention until just now, but I had always looked at playing the Opry as like a bucket list item, and I thought, well, once I do that, I'll be satisfied. And I got a random opportunity about 3 years ago to go fill in, just kind of as side man on the Opry for this group called Daly and Vincent, and I did it also with 2 other sidemen that were filling in, called Stuart Duncan and Terry Buckland.
Not bad.
Yeah, it was not bad.
Not bad for sidemen to do it.
And it was a very odd, very surreal experience for me because it happened fast. I only had a few days' notice, and whenever you do it, you'll always remember that first time more than anything. And as soon as I walked off the stage, I thought I would be satiated or whatever with this experience, this bucket list item that I had crossed off at age 27, and I wasn't. As soon as I walked off the stage, I said, I've got to do this again.
Yeah.
There's like no way I could, continue living my life and at least not try my damnedest to get back there. Because, for me, like you talking about community, my whole family was there, and the Opry was a really important institution in my family. I got into music because of my family, and so for so much of my family to be there, it was the coolest, one of the coolest nights of my life.
Yeah, it's like if you're like in the Catholic Church, you go to the Vatican, right?
Yes, that's a great example.
Yeah, and you can you just explain who Stuart and Terry are for people who might not know?
So, Daly and Vincent is a high-powered band. They can do all different kind of things, and they've got a big band. They're like Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys, man. They've got a big band, and so they can call on just about whoever they want. They're super pro guys, super good to work with, and they just kind of had this one-off weekend, so they needed somebody to fill in, and they got this guy named Stuart Duncan, who you mentioned there. And when I was growing up, Stuart was just on everybody's radios. When I was really getting into music, Mark O'Connor, I think, was probably getting out of the studio scene, and Stuart was taking all kind of work, man. And I was probably most heavily exposed to him, maybe through his big work with Alan Jackson, George Strait, and guys like that. He was on all their albums for years and years. It still is. Anything that they do, they always call him. And he's just this phenomenal fiddle player and just great musician who's just so musical in what he does, and he's so unpredictable. You can hear him. And I've heard him thousands of times and heard thousands of different recordings he's on, and it's always different. Yeah. And so for me to grow up listening to him and having so much respect for him, and then stand there grinning like an idiot next to him on the Opry, while he just totally played awesome and did something totally different than we expected him to do, like always.
Yeah.
He's just one of those fiddle players that just has a great voice in terms of what he plays and the ability to relate to people, and that's why he's gotten so much work.
It's him right away.
Yeah, he's got such a killer tone.
Yeah.
It's very, very unique. And then Terry Buckland was playing banjo, and I'd also grew up listening to him. And so I never really had met those guys prior to that. So it was a little uncomfortable. I feel like it put a little bit of pressure on me, but it was getting to play with those guys. I just thought, well, man, this could happen again here, or something like it. It wouldn't have to be those 2 guys.
Yeah. I mean, it's like right down to the. So I started this podcast because I was just curious about the town, and within a week, I'm talking to John Hartford's daughter, and I'm talking to Matt Combs, who played was in the Opry, and what's so interesting here is my decision to move was to move to LA.
Right. Okay.
And then through a series of circumstances last year, I ended up pivoting to come to Nashville.
Right.
And every day I'm like, thank God I moved to Nashville, because your proximity to people and their access, if you're cool, and when I say cool, I mean you're not trying to get something from them. You're just interested. And substantial.
LA doesn't have it. Everyone there is so guarded because there's so many people. It's so hard to have access. It's so hard to get access to those folks. And eventually, you live there, you do.
Right.
But it takes a very, very long time. And here, I mean, you can call up anyone and say, hey, I just moved to town. Can I bring you to coffee? And I was like, cool, let's go.
Well, especially with the bluegrass community, I guess we're continuing to touch on what's so important about it. And the longer I've been here, I've been exposed to all different Music City people, all walks of life. And what I found most interesting is music has all these ancillary benefits that come with it. It could be money, glory, women, etc., men, whatever you're into.
Yeah.
and you find out pretty quick who really is in it for the music.
Yeah.
It's cool, all that other stuff. I'm not knocking it.
Yeah.
You know, that's all, you know, fine benefits. But really, you find out quickly who's in it for the music, and those are the people that are in bluegrass.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
They're really in it for the, you know, their contribution to the music.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't realize any of that until until I became more familiar with the bluegrass scene. Is I said earlier, I'm from Portland, Maine, and there are musicians in Portland, Maine. And this will be controversial to whoever's listening from Portland, Maine, but I didn't realize that there is a difference between a musician and a musician.
Right.
You know, and then when I started to meet people who were fully committed to exactly as you say, who are singularly focused on music, and everything else that comes with it is fantastic.
Yeah.
But if those are not the goals, the music is the goal. I was like, oh, this is a way different situation than what I ran into before.
Is. Yeah. And I've dealt with less ego and less arrogance in this huge music scene than in other small towns and you know, little bitty music scenes. Yeah. Just because every time you turn around, there's somebody better than you at whatever the hell you do.
Yeah.
Singing, playing. There's so much talent in this area that it would seem silly. It's very humbling just to go out every day and listen to all the great pickers around. And there's great camaraderie. People are generally interested in helping one another out. And some of your best allies are other musicians, because they'll have a gig that they can't make. They'll have more than they can get at some point, or something they're not interested in, or something that fits you better, or whatever. So the more of these kind of people you can meet, the better for your own career. It's not we do compete for work against one another, but it's not nearly as cutthroat as other businesses that I've been involved in, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. What are you hoping for the Legion night, for the Bluegrass night at the Legion? Like, we
would like it to be like Honky Tonk Tuesday, to be honest.
Gotta get Vince to come down.
My hat is off to those guys. I have so much respect for what they've done, and they've been at it for about 4 years.
They've done a great job with it.
They've found something that has a great vibe that community embraces, and there's people that continually write about it. They've had several articles published, because it's so mystifying to see, you know, for these somebody that doesn't come to the Legion every week. It's mystifying for them to see some young gal with hairy armpits dancing with an old guy.
Or my favorite, when my first night there, and that's such a good description. My favorite was like 4-H 14-year-olds dancing with like smoking punk hipsters. Like, and I was like, what is that?
Yeah, it's kind of a clashing of worlds.
Right, totally.
But that's totally okay. Yeah. And that's why the event has become so successful. And it's filled with those people that are in it for the music. And I think Vince Gill is clearly one of those people. And so is everybody that was in his band last month. And for those that are listening that may not be aware, Vince Gill did appear at the American Legion Post 82 last month, which was in May. And Emmylou Harris, Paul Franklin,
Rodney Crowell
had an awesome band. Rodney Crowell was actually Rodney's band. Yeah, had Jay Weaver playing bass, Eamon McLaughlin playing fiddle.
Someone who knew Rodney Crowell had texted me that it was going to happen, and I just did, and I was an idiot. I just didn't believe. I was like, I don't believe you.
Well, and it was.
But you guys, but you guys have something that's so fascinating in that it's like participatory in a way that, and I'm not. It's not like we're here comparing or contrasting these things, but you have this thing that's fascinating for me as someone who's not a musician, but who has been to the Bluegrass Night a couple times, is you can show up as a spectator sort of like sit around musicians as they're figuring stuff out in real time, which is a really fascinating opportunity. And it's the thing I imagined Nashville was when I started imagining Nashville, but apparently it isn't always that way, you know, that you can come to a night and sort of be involved in that.
Right.
Well, and that's certainly something that's true with bluegrass. I think that it appeals sometimes to maybe the older crowd because of that accessibility to the musicians. Yep. I first getting into bluegrass really couldn't differentiate a normal celebrity from a bluegrass celebrity at first. And when you're a kid, they're all kind of the same to you. They're all your heroes. And I learned that there is a stark contrast between a bluegrass celebrity and maybe a normal, more mainstream celebrity. And so it was neat for me to to have that access to musicians. I think people really rely on that in bluegrass. That you go play a bluegrass festival. Most of the bands, you could probably go meet them at their record table after the show,
right.
and they'd be happy to give you some of their time. And that is not prevalent in mainstream music. It is just not. You have to pay for access to those people through a meet and greet if you're lucky. A lot of them won't even do that. And so I think that's what appeals, especially to older people. It's a more relaxed setting, and just everything's more relaxed in general. The volume's not so damn loud at those festivals. The schedule's fairly normal.
Yeah.
It's not super late night for a lot of those. So I think that that is certainly an appeal of bluegrass, and we've carried that over to the Legion. And I've had friends who came from out of town, and is that Molly Tuttle over there hanging out?
Right.
Yeah, it is. Leave her alone.
Yeah.
Don't fanboy her. She's just hanging out, and you never know who's going to come in over there. But I mean, I joke, but they are very much more accessible, and it's nice having that kind of informal place like Evan was talking about for us to jam, because to further describe what we do each week. So we are the Post 82 house band. Me and Evan, and everybody else comes and goes. We're the only constant each week. I sing, I host the show, Evan plays bass. I'm usually playing mandolin, but I flex. I'll do guitar, I'll do banjo if I need to. Had to do that the other day. It was fun. Hadn't done that in a long time. But because of that rotating cast, obviously our show's going to be a little more loose. Because we've never rehearsed with all these people. We don't have a set list typically. We just kind of do whatever we feel like doing. And so that allows for plenty of time for guests or whoever else is in the audience to get up there. And that's some of the more special moments that we have a lot of times. And it's been great for me as well, from somebody that's fairly new to town, and Evan, I'm sure, to meet all these pickers and have an excuse to get to pick with them. Hey, you want to come pick with me next Wednesday? We're having X, Y, and Z. And everybody really seems to enjoy that as well. It's everybody's looking for an excuse to pick, and that's a good one. And we've met some great folks that I had never played with before, and would not have otherwise met without that.
Yeah, I think it's also a good, based on what you're saying and what you're doing, and based on sort of any of the doors that this podcast has opened, or anything I've seen people do, is like, I feel like the best advice you could give to anyone who shows up to a new place is like, go do stuff, which seems
absolutely.
silly, but people need to be reminded, right?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to get out there and just, meet people, introduce yourself.
You do. And for me, music is a lot different than what going out is to people. Going out, that might mean partying and carrying and drinking on, and sometimes it's that.
Yeah.
But I go out 6 or 7 nights a week, and I'm young. I can afford to do that because I don't have some of the responsibilities that maybe some of my other friends with families and so forth have. And I love that I'm still fairly new to town, so I love that freedom of being able to go explore as much music as I can. I feel like I would regret it if later in life if I didn't.
Yeah. So you guys tomorrow are having. Can you just explain the event that you're having tomorrow? Because in the spirit of Pride Month. What's happening?
I guess you could call it Bluegrass Wednesdays Pride Night. But we are having an organization that is its own nonprofit. I guess it was born out of the CBA, the California Bluegrass Association, called Bluegrass Pride.
Yeah.
And it specifically focuses on including anyone that's in the gay community in bluegrass.
Yeah. Well, and how did that come up, and how does that fit into what you guys are doing now?
Well, we've known the folks from out there. I met everybody in that organization last year, and they approached me, I don't know, maybe a few months ago about it, and weren't exactly sure who we could get or what we could put together. And here at the last minute, well, not really last minute, but here over the last few weeks, we've worked with them, and the focus, I think, is to make a genre of music that has been heavily straight white male dominated. And include those that are not straight white males, because they still can heavily contribute something great to our genre, and they need to be able to have a voice. And if some of our heroes were alive today, some of our music heroes, they would probably be heavily exposed for scandals that maybe maybe didn't matter as much back then.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a genre that sort of had carved out a niche by people who were sort of outside of where they were at the time.
Yeah,
sure, and it's it's been male dominated big time, and so I think bluegrass has done a really good job at including women. If you look at our charts, whichever one you use, there's several different bluegrass charts. If you compare that to country music, we're way ahead of country. Country is still so heavily male dominated. There's just hardly ever a woman at the top of the charts, and that's a horse of a different color. But the whole bluegrass community has been working hard the last several years to include women.
Yeah.
And I think this kind of comes after that. I think that with the inclusion of women, we can see that there are other groups that need to be included as well. And that's just kind of the way that it works. Society, without getting too political, becomes a little bit more liberal over time.
It does.
Clearly, we as a society have gotten more liberal.
Do you, and with this is this is the South, and we're talking about a Legion, and we're talking like how is it going to fit?
Well, we're still abiding by the Legion's rule of no profanity, which would apply on any other night, not just this night. But so I think it'll really fit together great. I think it'll be about like any other music night that we have with a really stacked lineup.
Right.
And that's the focus of it. Really is the music. It's not specifically a gay pride only organization. It's trying to include gay musicians in bluegrass.
Yeah.
So that focus is going to be we're going to try to spend as much time on that focus as we can with just highlighting the talent of these musicians and their musical contribution and letting their voice be heard, because in previous periods of history that just wasn't the case.
Yeah. Well, and I said this before, but I know bluegrass and acoustic musicians who don't identify as straight, or they identify as gay, they identify as queer or trans or whatever, who really appreciate anyone who's sort of honoring this effort. So I think that it's good to be able to have a space for that.
Sure, absolutely.
Well, and it's something that me as a white male, I've been able to ignore. It's been easy for me to get my voice heard, and it's been easy for me to have, I feel like, to follow whatever path that I wanted to. I've had opportunity that I may have taken for granted because of my position. And once I really paid attention to the disadvantage that other people have outside of somebody that's like me, I realized that they deserve to have their voice be heard, because what could we be missing out from some of these talented folks that couldn't have had an openly gay music career in Bill Monroe's band?
Right.
That just wouldn't have worked.
No.
Yes. Well, I'm psyched for it, and obviously this episode's coming out after it happens, but we just wanted to talk about it, considering
I appreciate
it's Friday.
it. Yeah, we were happy to be able to work with them, and it's going to be a great event. Going to have all kind of wonderful guests. We've got, I guess, most of the band of Front Country, West Corbett Band. Molly Tuttle's going to be there. The house band is me and Evan, Deanie Richardson, Tristan Wade,
Tristan Scroggins
as well. So it cost you a lot of money to get this lineup that we're getting. It's kind of a Nashville exclusive. So this is a perfect example for everybody to really showcase the talent of everybody, because that's what it's about, is just the inclusiveness.
Yeah. Do you guys have any closing thoughts?
Well, I would say the Legion is great any night of the week. I could go down the list of all the different acts that they have. We've obviously mentioned Honky Tonk Tuesday, but there's other nights of the week that have some really great events going on. So the Legion would be one of my go-tos any night of the week. If you just want to drink a cold beer or a nice liquor drink that's not $17.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the bar is manageable.
And there's free parking, and there's plenty of it. And if it fills up, you can park in the turkey chute.
Yes, you can.
In the back. Yep. And or you can park up. There's plenty. It's much easier to park than anywhere downtown.
Yeah.
So that's one of my go-tos. As far as other places around town, I always throw a shout out to the Station Inn.
Have to.
Wearing a hat, wearing a Station Inn
I just
hat.
realized I'm
another wood paneled historical location.
And JT Gray has done a great job just preserving that wonderful venue and keeping it original to its roots. It's got some country music in there, and that's pushing his envelope because he wants to keep it just all bluegrass, and he's really done so. And it's amazing how that area has changed, and that little hole in the wall is still hanging on. And
I don't even recognize that area anymore.
No, and I hope that the Station Inn can stay there forever. I hope they can do something to keep it where it is, because it's a very special spot, and it's the same kind of venue. It's got a lot of nostalgia. You never know who's going to come in the door over there.
Yeah, so. I have no political clout because I just moved here in February, but I feel like we should issue a warning to Nashville's political leaders and say if the Station Inn goes down, people are probably going to be very upset.
I would agree with that.
I believe that's a pretty common consensus, and from what I can understand, it's in good hands for the time being.
Good.
I hope it stays that way. But that's one of the venues that really drew me to town. It was one of the first ones I played at in town before I ever lived here, maybe 12 or 15 years ago. And it used to be a smoky, dim-lit bar as well, but it is smoke-free as well. So I'd highly recommend it. There's dime a dozen wonderful venues. I've spent a lot of time at the Local that I've been talking about here lately. They have great country music there. It's dedicated specifically to country, not really bluegrass, but it's older country, not bro country.
Yeah.
And it's specifically that Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I was there all of those days this weekend. I was playing part of it, but some of the music that you'll catch there is worth the trip for sure.
Right on. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much.
Well, thank you for having us. I appreciate it. Yeah.
I feel like this is the first episode I've done in a while that actually focuses on the music of Nashville, so I appreciate it.
Well, good. What do y'all normally talk about?
It just depends on who's available.
Okay.
The first two episodes were about John Hartford, and then the next one was about beer, and then the next, they're all there.
That's cool.
It depends on who's where and available.
Well, we have all of those things at the Legion. So we have Hartford influence, beer, and a bunch of Nashville topics.
Yeah, you're a hell of a salesman. It's good.
Appreciate that.
Awesome.
Thank you guys for having us.
Thank you. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Nashville Demystified. Thanks to Jesse LaFontaine for all things related to sound post-production. Thanks to Michael Eads for help with producing this episode. He had some good ideas and helped me steer everything in the right direction. All of the music in this episode is by all sorts of different people. You can find a list on the website. Our website is NashvilleDemystified.com. Hey, each episode has a show-specific illustration provided by my longtime friend Tim Burns. They're pretty great, so check out the site to see them. In the coming weeks, we'll have more on queer history. We will have some pieces on Black history. We will have something on comedy. And at some point, I'm going to call a close to what we will call Season 1 and then announce a new show that I'll be taking on in the meantime. Stay tuned for that. Subscribe, follow us, do all that stuff. It really does help. Leave a review. A review would be great. Nashville Demystified is presented by Knack Factory, and we own this town. That's it for me right now. Thanks so much to our guests. Thanks so much to you. We'll talk soon.